Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Kimberly Mealy. I'm the Executive Director of the American Political Science Association. On behalf of the association, I would like to welcome you to the 18th Annual APSA Teaching and Learning Conference. The APSA TLC is one component of APSA's broader teaching and learning programming, which also includes TLC at APSA, which is a one-day conference within a conference at the annual meeting. And additionally, we have the Teaching and Learning Symposia that occur throughout the year, as well as APSA Educate, a library of teaching resources APSA continues to provide to our members. APSA continues to strive to produce new and innovative programming to support political science teachers and faculty, and to address the current challenges associated with teaching political science. To that end, this year's TLC focuses on how and why teaching political science matters. This theme builds on past APSA President John Ishiyama, who's sitting up front here. It builds upon John Ishiyama's Presidential Task Force on Rethinking Political Science Education and invites attendees to rethink the future of political science education and to reflect on why teaching political science matters. In your track sessions and in your workshops, you will hear evidence-based research presented on innovative and inclusive pedagogy. You'll also hear best practices for engaging students and for preparing them to be informed citizens. And then finally, you'll hear important questions with regard to the future of political science education. So before I conclude my introduction, I do just want to take a moment to say I'm very excited to be here at the Teaching and Learning Conference. I met many of you, and I see some friendly faces of old friends, and I see new faces as well, very friendly faces as well. I met many of you at the Teaching and Learning Conference when I first started at the association. I won't say how many years ago, but many years ago. So I have a very fond place in my heart for the TLC, and I have learned so much from this community, and I always get reinvigorated for political science, for the discipline, for the future of the profession when I come to the TLC conferences. So I think you all should give yourselves a hand for that. So I would like to thank all of you for your continued and for your innovative contributions to teaching and learning within the profession, and to your contributions to the scholarship of teaching and learning. Now I would like to introduce APSA's president, Dr. Tae-Koo Lee, who will present 2 teaching awards. Dr. Lee is the Bay Family Professor of Government at Harvard University. Tae-Koo?
Thank you, Kim, and how wonderful to have welcoming remarks from our new executive director of the association. As APSA president, it's my distinct pleasure and honor to present 2 prestigious awards, the APSA Award for Teaching Innovation and the Michael Brentnall Teaching and Learning Award. So first, I'm pleased to recognize the recipient of this year's Michael Brentnall Teaching and Learning Award, which supports attendance at this conference. The award is named in honor of former APSA Executive Director Michael Brentnall, who was deeply committed to advancing scholarship of teaching and learning in the discipline. Michael also played an integral role in founding the Teaching and Learning Conference 2 decades ago. The Brentnall Award recipient for 2025 is In-tae Choi. Dr. Choi is a teaching postdoctoral fellow in the Truman School of Government and Public Affairs at the University of Missouri, where he earned his PhD in Public Affairs in 2024. He is committed to fostering an engaging learning environment that emphasizes the practical application of theoretical concepts. Building on his professional experience, he is passionate about interdisciplinary teaching and research, striving to connect political science with broader social science fields to address complex societal challenges. Dr. Che, would you please come up here to collect your award certificate? And let's have a warm round of applause. Congratulations. Congratulations, Dr. Che. Next, we have the APSA Award for Teaching Innovation. With this award, the APSA honors a wide range of new directions in teaching by recognizing a political scientist who has developed an effective new approach to teaching in the discipline. The 2025 Award for Teaching Innovation is awarded to Shamira Gelbman, who is a professor of political science at Wabash College. In the award citation, the award committee notes that Dr. Gelbman's commitment to centering how students engage with the subject matter appears across her teaching in the variety of assignments and experiential learning that is embedded throughout her courses. Her innovation in teaching is exemplified by her Caught Up in a Crisis of Victory project, which she has used to engage with students in her Politics of the Civil Rights Movement course. Innovation of this approach illuminated the best of what political science education can do for students as learners and as engaged community members. It is a fantastic example of what political science can offer to undergraduate education broadly. So please join me in congratulating Dr. Gelbman. And Dr. Gelbman, if you could come up to receive your award. Let me also just take a moment to recognize and appreciate the award committee members for their service to the association. For the Brentnall Award, thanks to Terry Gilmore, John Ishiyama, and Lenithia Matthews-Schultz. And for the Teaching Innovation Award, we thank Laura Roost, Charles Turner, and Liz Norrell. And now I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Terry Gilmore, Professor of Political Science at Midland College. Dr. Gilmore is one of the program co-chairs for this year's TLC, and she will introduce our plenary speaker.
Good afternoon. Welcome. I can't tell you, this is like the best job I've ever had, to introduce Dr. Michelle Deardorff, who is not only my friend, but a friend to so many of us here in this room. Before I give her introduction, though, I would like to introduce the committee that worked on this particular conference. My co-chair, partner in crime, Stephen Meinhold from the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. Also, Natasha Duncan from Purdue University, they're out over there. Josh Franco from Cuyamaca College, and he's a congressional fellow, and I think he's going to be here tomorrow. John Ishiyama from the University of North Texas, and Lenithia Matthews-Schultz from Muhlenberg College. So please thank them. But really and truly, it is the staff at APSA that makes all of us look good. We really don't have to do near as much as it sounds like we do. So to Michelle Allendorfer and to Bennett and to other APSA staff, and I too would like to congratulate Kim Mealy. She has no idea how happy members of this section were when she was named the executive director. So, yay, we are glad you are here. Now I want to talk a little bit. Very briefly, I'm not going to elaborate on all of Michelle's accomplishments and her history, all you've got to do is Google Michelle Deardorff, and you're going to get everything you need to know. Rather, what I wanted to focus on is really her contribution to this conference, the reason that we're here. We know that she's an incredible scholar. We know that she is a published author. We know that she is widely recognized in our field of political science. But I think that, and I remember, I won't say that I met her when I went to my first teaching and learning conference in 2008, but I recognized very soon that she was a presence in our particular field of teaching and learning. She comes from a very diverse background. There's really no one that would be better suited to talk about teaching, from teaching at a small liberal arts college to a historically black university to now at the University of Tennessee, Chattanooga. But I think, once again, and I talked to John Ishiyama a little bit. I've had several conversations with several people that have known Michelle for a long time. But she's been here since literally from the beginning. John and Michelle were approached back in 2000 about the idea of having a journal, and today we have that journal. And then they were also approached about the possibility of a teaching and learning conference. And that conference began 21 years ago in 2004, when I think 35 people gathered in Washington, D.C. That was the very first conference. I didn't come on board until 2008, but I can tell you, as a community college teacher from the desert out in West Texas, once I came to this conference, I've come back every year because it gives a place for those of us who really consider teaching our calling. I remember too, after getting to know her a little bit, she was talking about assessment long before anybody else was talking about it, long before my home state of Texas not only made it important, but tied our funding to it. And I think, and Michelle, this goes back to Albuquerque, I think in 2020. One of the things about Michelle is that she has this uncanny ability to listen to what people have to say. And then she has an ability to kind of bring us together, kind of summarize what we've done, and then she has the ability to listen once again before she then pulls us back and makes us move forward. And I'm kind of referring to coming up with goals and objectives for the whole thing that we talked about. Michelle has really been a mentor and a friend as I look around this room, and I know some of you may not know her, but you will know her. I promise you that. And I really want to just end, before she talks about finding joy teaching in dark times, with a quote from John Ishiyama. He said, "Michelle was there from the beginning of the movement to promote teaching and learning in APSA. And Michelle was the central figure in bringing this conference into existence. We all owe her a tremendous amount of gratitude. Because of her efforts, we are all here today." Michelle.
Being a good teacher, I have this in multiple forms, so if the technology falls, I'm ready to go. Well, thank you very much. I think it's going to be hard to live up to that. But I do want to talk about why I still have joy in teaching. And hopefully for those of you who are struggling right now, this conference can be a way of renewing that joy. So over the last 34 years, since I began my postgraduate teaching career in 1991, I have had many incredible experiences. I have taught at different types of institutions, each for at least a decade. All of them have focused on first and second generation students. As the first female in the family with a bachelor's degree, that's my sweet spot. I like first and second generation students. I have translated Cold War curriculum into contemporary students in response to current needs 3 times now at 3 different institutions. I've taught courses on race and law through Rodney King, O.J. Simpson, Ferguson, Trayvon Martin, Black Lives Matter in the summer of 2020, as well as teaching through September 11th, Hurricane Katrina when I was in Mississippi, and most recently, the pandemic. We all have these touchstone moments in our career that may vary depending on our subject matters, that impact the way we teach and the way our students engage in learning. So I ask you, what have been yours? I've experienced teaching and research before the widespread availability of the internet, and figuring out how the internet and smartphones had to transform the purpose of the classroom and the goals of our pedagogy, and now we're doing it all again with AI. But as I said this morning, on steroids. It's the same process. I've had the privilege of watching our discipline, as Terry talked about, transform from a place in the early 90s where I presented a paper at Midwest or APSA on reproductive rights, where the chair of the panel and I were the only women in the room, to a much more diverse, and still working on it, discipline. When a meeting of the precursor to the political science education section met, John was there in a hotel room with 5 of us, to this, right? To a conference now. Here we are 20-odd years on, and a peer-reviewed teaching journal that's provided to every single APSA member. That's huge. The changes have been tremendous. And of course, there's more to do, as the Ishiyama Presidential Task Force report lays out, but we've come so far. And throughout all these years, it seems that the response to people discovering, and you probably hear this too, when they hear I teach political science, they always say, it must be an exciting time to teach political science. And my response has been the same. It's always an exciting time to teach political science. That's never changed. But today, things are different. They feel different. Regardless of our political ideology, our party affiliation, these especially difficult times, uncertain times, dark times. And that has certainly added a different dimension to our classroom. I feel it, you feel it, they feel it. We have seen democratic values undermined globally. We grieve in watching the very institutions that we study on a daily basis be under attack. I'm a public law and political theory person, and I'm telling you, watching the destruction of the legitimacy of the judiciary and rule of law from both internally and externally is painful. And I'm sure you're experiencing similar things. We observe deep, apparently unreconcilable divisions within our nation. It's going to get positive in a minute, I promise. Not only over politics and policy priorities, but over the very meaning of reality. As a nation, we're watching the same events unfold, but drawing radically different interpretations from what we're observing, and we see very different phenomenon. So how do we encourage our students to leave their feeds and find shared moments of gathering and interpreting political information? We witness higher education under profound attack by those who question its value and its relevance. In fall 2021, 68% of college faculty were contingent on term contracts, and 48% were adjuncts. Costs have shifted from the public sector to the private sector, and the assumption is that faculty are in charge of the curriculum is now under attack throughout the country. What used to be a public good is now seen as a purely private benefit that's measured by returns on investment. We teach students who continue to struggle with the consequences of multi-year disruptions to their education, and they're wrestling to fill in the gaps. And with our students, we wrestle with the uncertainty of our current world, and you can fill in your primary concern or the issue that causes you the most anxiety for the future. How are you maintaining hope while the political environment is soiled by misinformation and distrust even of truth in its pursuit? So it's easy to lament, to despair, and to grieve. But when we gather with each other at our conferences, especially like this one, we often gather to commiserate, to share our struggles, and to remember we're not alone. When I was at Jackson State, one of my closest friends was a lawyer who taught at the predominantly white law school in Jackson. And we would joke that she was the black professor at the white school who taught law, law and gender and race, and I was the white professor at the black school who taught law and gender and race. And so for almost a decade, we had lunch every month, which grew into shared work, law review articles and presentations over time. But our lunches began as a way to share our frustrations and encourage each other to persevere, holding each other accountable to our shared values as academics and as human beings. And we often do this. We gather to express our frustrations and hopefully our joys. I know I have a group of colleagues here in this space right now who gather on my Zoom room every Monday night for almost 5 years now to commiserate with each other. And although I join them all too infrequently, we know that sharing sorrow and successes bring people tighter, closer, and helps them feel less alone. So let's look at this conference. This is a place where people who in many ways have very little in common. We come from very different kinds of institutions that have different purposes and different missions, and very unique student bodies. We study different subfields and research radically different topics. But we come here and gather because we share the value of the importance of teaching political science, because we believe teaching political science matters. But as Hannah Arendt reminds us in her 1959 address on humanity in dark times, it is in sharing our joy that we advance our humanity, even more than when we share our sorrow. So what does it mean to share our joy? In this session, I want us to explore how we can find joy in our teaching, joy that nurtures hope and sustains us for the work ahead. You just have to read the Chronicle of Higher Ed on a regular basis. I'm trying to cut myself off from that. To sense the deep and profound despair within higher education today. How do we persevere in light of this climate and our concerns? So, throughout my career, and despite the challenges we face today, I think many of my perspectives are the same as when I began. I had a colleague, Paul Folger, who I taught with for the first 7 years of my career. He was the person that I developed my teaching philosophy and probably a lot of my academic ethos. I hope all of you have had or have a Paul in your life. Paul just retired from Heartland Community College, and he once said that if I ever wrote an autobiography, it should be called Michelle D. Deardorff, Perpetually Disappointed and Eternally Optimistic. And I think he's right. By the end of every term, it feels like I have not done enough. Like many of you, I think, I read final projects, I listened to the end of the term whining, and I grieve the lost potential. I observe how much the students have missed from what I intended to teach. Every single term. That's like 65 times. Maybe you've experienced this many existential despair, this every term dark night of the soul where you ask, what was the point and why do I do this? But I never lived there. In fact, now when I share my disappointment with Dave, my husband, who's been there since undergraduate days, he just sighs because he knows it's a transitory moment and he has to just listen to me. On the other hand, there's a novel that I read every spring by R.F. Deardorff called To Serve Them All My Days. Dave says he can always tell when it's the end of the school year because I pull out the book. E-readers have made me more subtle. Deardorff writes of a Welsh son of a coal miner who served in the trench wars of World War I and who, after a bad war, is sent to recover from shell shock by teaching history at a boys' school in the English Moors. And the book tells the story of his career, essentially, and his experiences teaching as a non-degreed, inexperienced, insecure instructor with serious imposter syndrome, who just happened to love history. From his first class through the years of watching his former students die in World War II as the headmaster of the school, it tells that whole story. But the book is about, and this is why I read it every spring, how the schoolmaster engaged in the inculcation of democratic values and the political resistance in the classroom of boys who would have never thought of it on their own. and the mingled pain and joy of seeing the impact of these lessons in the lives of those he taught. I read it annually because it reminds me of the bigger import of what we do. Because despite my disillusionment every term, something miraculous always happens, as I hope it does for you. I hear from students from my past, colleagues who participated in workshops that I led on campus or at other institutions, students from that term making an observation on current events, those little emails that come during break, students who are faculty who've used one of my textbooks, or a community member who attended a talk I gave or saw me on the media and liked what I had to say or didn't like what I had to say. And I realized that what I did may have inspired others to do what they need to do to politically engage, or even cause them to ask questions and want to think more deeply, or just want to continue the conversation, and I get excited. Revising my syllabus, thinking about the forthcoming readings and discussions, and seeing the potential in what could happen in that classroom. Where do you see your own glimmers of hope or redemption? Do you keep the left-hand drawer of the notes and cards that come, so when it gets bad, you can pull them out? I still have anxiety dreams going into the first week of classes. My recurring one, so you'll now know more about me than you want to know, is that I have to give a final in a class I've never taught. My second favorite is going into class and no one can hear me speak. I had one really bad one where my husband sat in the back row and read the paper while I was trying to teach. Yeah, we had to deal with some stuff then, clearly. And I walk into the first week of class, the first discussion, excited about an aspect of the topic we're going to study that has relevance to their lives, or we have a chance to see what's going to happen. I have to say, on Thursday, right before I got on the plane, I had 3 of the best classes I've had in years. And the fact they were all in one day, there's no feeling to describe that, right? It's an incredible feeling when it all falls into place and they keep talking past the end of the hour because they're so excited about what you're engaging them in. It's this intersection between disappointment and hope, the broader importance of our work, that I want to kind of talk about. So teaching is an act of optimism. So how do I maintain this optimism and, frankly, absolute joy in teaching? More importantly, how can we nurture and foster this in each other and in ourselves? How do we sustain hope? Not naive, foolish, magical thinking, but instead generate a reaction to the empty cynicism and despair that surrounds us. We're too often tempted to play to the empty cynicism of our students and get the cheap feedback and approbation that this guarantees. But this is dangerous. Our students do not need to have their fear and despair reflected by us. Acknowledged, yes, but not demonstrated, because they need hope too. Again, learning more about me than you probably want to know. I'm a fan of Nick Cave, and in his recent book, Faith, Hope, and Carnage, he notes at the end that hope is optimism with a broken heart. In a recent blog post, and he also did a August interview with Stephen Colbert, he said the following, and cynicism is not a neutral position. And although it seeks almost nothing of us, it is highly infectious and unbelievably destructive. In my view, it is the most common and easy of evils. I know this because much of my early life was spent holding the world and the people in it in contempt. It was a position both seductive and indulgent. Unlike cynicism, hopefulness is hard-earned. It makes demands upon us, and it can often feel like the most indefensible and lonely place on earth. Hopefulness is not a neutral position. It is adversarial. It is the warrior emotion that can lay waste to cynicism with each redemptive or loving act as small as you like. It says the world and its inhabitants have value and are worth defending. It says the world is worth believing in. In time, we come to find that is so. I think this is what Arendt is noting about joy. And she is writing during the darkest of times. For joy comes from this hope. Every time we step into the classroom, we are saying people can learn. Things can change. The outcome is not inevitable. Every time we invest in ideas and other people, we're saying that what we do matters. At the beginning of every term, and each new community that's being formed, I say the same thing. I come into class and tell them, this is holy time. This is time set aside in our world for a special purpose, to think about ideas. And in our world, we have very little time that is valued like this. So for me, I tell them, this is the most important time of the week. This is the time we get to reason and discover together. One of my many epiphanies at Jackson State, as my white self looked across my black classroom, was that I had a chance with a group of people the world perceived as merely physical bodies, to engage with them as minds, and to model the incredible freedom that comes with that, especially in our world today. This does not mean to ignore their physical realities or their emotions, but I think this is true of all of our students in the 21st century. Our students are mostly seen, and I think often perceive of themselves, mostly as their physical aspects, which purchase goods, need and uses resources, causes problems, and provides labor. It's in the classroom that they're able to see and be seen and contribute in a completely different way. This is the hope of teaching. At times, Dave, and he's not going to let me say this, but he can be a doom scroller, right? And really wants to have those conversations with me, and I have to tell him, and he understands that I can only do this for a short while, because if I despair, I cannot teach, I cannot write, I cannot hope. And I need that hope, so I have to nurture and protect it. So I want to share with you two very specific things that I've done over the course of my career, strategies that I've pursued and experiences I've sought. They are not profound, I'm telling you now, but they are pragmatic. And I know what I'm going to share is not unique to me, but that many of us have pursued similar things. And so after I've shared mine, I'm hoping we'll take the remainder of my time, then I have a short thing to say at the end, for us in smaller groups for you to share yours. So the first one is this. I had another epiphany. I have a lot of epiphanies. There are often shower epiphanies, which again is more than you wanted to know. But I had another epiphany at Millikan about 7 years, that was my first place, the liberal arts college, about 7 years into full-time teaching. I'd run into an alumnus, and many of you, if you've taught long enough, you've had this very dispiriting experience. I ran into an alumnus who had become a lawyer, and I made a joke with him about Marbury versus Madison, a fairly foundational Supreme Court case that we had studied together years before. And this very good student didn't remember the case, didn't recognize the name, and looked at me like, what was I talking about? Oh my goodness, I realized that what I thought I was doing in the classroom was not happening. And this led to about a 6-month deep reflection on the ways of what I was doing in the classroom. What was my purpose? What was the big picture? What is the long-term purpose of my work? It corresponded with the vast expansion of the internet, and so, how I was taught no longer made sense to teach. Teaching students to find information, retain information, and use information no longer had a point. In the same way, if they just have their phones or able to access it. So I'd really had to wrestle with my purpose in teaching and my pedagogy. And so what I had to think about is why I did what I did. And maybe some of you, some of us with AI are beginning to wrestle with that again, right? Why are we doing it? So I did a workshop at TLC at APSA this last fall with Titus, that Titus led. And he asked us to think about a slogan or a motto that summarized our purpose. And why I'm not good with mottos. I am with themes. And I had realized that over the course of my career, and reflecting over it, I know what my big purpose is. I help people make meaningful democracy possible. More specifically, I help provide people the tools to talk to each other about hard things, regardless of their differences, but particularly over race and political differences. And of course, I still teach the content, please. I teach the content of public law, that's the fun stuff, and political theory, but now I do it for some very big, and you're gonna see, career-consuming purposes. So how does this work? So first of all, service. For many of us, service is a big part, especially those of us at more teaching institutions, service is a big part of our responsibilities as faculty. It may vary by the kind of role we play at our institution, what kind of position we hold, but it is a professional expectation for many of us. So I can talk about pedagogical approaches to these larger goals, and I certainly have discussed them over the many, many conferences and within the political science education section over the years. But I want to talk today about something different, how I did this in my service, because in my mind, much, certainly not all. I'm on a TMP committee now, so yeah, not all. But much of my service is also teaching, and it helps me keep excited in my classroom because I see how all the pieces fit together. I think many of us are doing this, but maybe not as deliberately as we could. For me, the deliberateness came later, so hopefully I can save you some years here. Some of my service has been about making institutional changes at my institution or in my community, and I'll give you two specific examples. In the summer of 2020, I realized that students were going to want to come back in the fall semester wanting to talk about race in America, and I was at the time where I am now a predominantly white institution. And our faculty and staff were going to want to help them. But it was really clear our faculty and staff were generally not equipped to have these conversations. So I took a workshop that I'd given in the local community and in my own department on how we talk about race and helping people practice this. So I offered a 7-session, 1.5-hour, 10-person workshops on facilitating discussions about race to any faculty and staff at the university who were interested. On Zoom, just put it out there. Over the next 2 years, I did 19 groups, including entire departments and the Chancellor's Cabinet. To this day, I get phone calls seeking advice, I get stopped on campus to hear a success story, or to commiserate with a failure, where they tried to have a conversation, it didn't work, or something's happening in the news and they don't understand it and they want to process it with someone. This was service that really mattered to me. This fall, I'm hoping to do a similar project on talking across political divide, a workshop that began as a 1-hour skills course I offered for our majors. My service is an extension of my teaching. Other parts of my service have been about making cultural changes. In 1997, I had the pleasure of doing a 6-week NEH Summer Institute on the Southern Civil Rights Movement at the Du Bois Institute at Harvard. And in my assigned small group, I met a diverse group of historians and political scientists who joined me in grieving the empty cynicism we saw in our students and their lack of awareness of the potential of democracy to bring about change. And we agreed that the story of the Civil Rights Movement demonstrated how local people could bring about systemic change. And so we formed the Fannie Lou Hamer Institute. One of our members was a former member of SNCC, who was the last surviving member of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, who was at the 1964 Democratic National Convention. And so over the next 20 years, we hosted NEH institutes for K-12 teachers, community college faculty, researchers, created civil rights driving tours, economic opportunity, career building, oral history panels, 2 museums, and led the Department of Education's Teaching American History grant with the local Jackson Public Schools. I could see the importance of this work, even with what I was doing in the classroom wasn't always quite so clear. But I could see the connection between the two. And finally, I write textbooks. I'm a co-author on the only all-female U.S. government text, American Democracy Now! With McGraw-Hill, who want you to know they're in the lobby and they'd be happy to talk to you. And I'm finishing a race and law, political science, case law book with Cambridge. And I never wonder who reads my work. I know who does. And I use these books again to equip people to have meaningful conversations. That's why I'm writing them. There are more examples I can give, but you get the point. The great thing about maneuvering your service as an expression of your teaching is that you're able to meet your service obligations in ways that matter to you, that advance your goals. It can be a very strategic choice. Doesn't mean you won't have to serve on some committees that you don't want to, but even now I see that service as advancing my larger goals. And everything I do, I ask, how are we helping people talk to each other and have meaningful conversations necessary for democracy? And this way of thinking works in all my life commitments: community engagement, my faith, my other social organizations. The second thing, and this is much shorter, control your career as best you can. Many of us hope to do these things now, but it's thinking about your career is a longer span. There are things you can't do now, right? But you may be able to do later. So I encourage you, define for yourself what your career looks like. Don't let the values of traditional academia tell you what is important. It's easy to keep your head down, and let me tell you, the semesters and years speed by. I was a mentor, APSA mentor of a young woman who, after we shared CVs and started finding common points, noted that she wanted to have a career just like mine, but much more prestigious. But that's the point, right? I couldn't have had my career at more prestigious institutions, right? I was at institutions that valued service and allowed me to create the things that fostered what I value. And this is the joy of having a wide variety of institutions at which we teach. They may be less prestigious, but they allow us to expand the definition of our work and of political science and of teaching. I've never been motivated by prestige, but neither has it ever been a real option for me, so I think it's all worked in my favor. My strength is synthesis, and Terry, thank you for saying that, because I know that. My strength is synthesis, conveying difficult concepts to a broad audience, but probably not original thought. So why not create a career that plays to my strengths, then beat myself up for not having the career academia values? We jump off the stupid hierarchy of institutional prestige and academic contributions we've been socialized to value, and instead focus on your goals, your contribution, and make that the center of your career. So think about phases. We have different things at different times: child rearing, elder care, health issues, interests, opportunities, skills. All those things impact what we can do and when we can do it. So what do you want to do next in your capacity as an instructor, a professor, or a teacher in the broadest definition? And how do you best position yourself for the next phase? So, where am I on time? I have time, okay. So what I'd like you to do is be TLC with each other and just get in small groups, and if someone's sitting by themselves, pull them in and ask yourself, what is your primary goal writ large in teaching? And how are you already advancing it in your service? I'm sure you are. And what do you do next to find this joy and hope in what you're doing? Well, this is when you talk. Okay, so I'm going to bring you back. A little bit more I want to say, where I get kind of, for me, provocative. And then after that, I'll just do Q&A, and when it's done, we're done. I'll hand it off. But I'll make sure we're done 2:15. Hand it over. Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
might have some weather tomorrow. Hopefully there's no weather on Sunday. We'll have a lot of days.
Well, I'm staying late. I'm having a I come through like 10 in the afternoon. I'm spending the night and then flying out on Monday.
Okay.
Okay. Because I know there's supposed to be weather coming in on Monday.
Yeah.
So my flight's at 10.
Okay.
Well, if not, the sun's out.
There you go. All right. Sit back down.
One more minute. I know. All right, this is always the tricky part of successful small group work. So I hope you continue these conversations and the next day ahead. But I want to finish up by saying this. What we do now matters more than ever before. I'm in Tennessee, and there are many members of my state legislature, as in many of yours, that are actively working to ban what I teach and research, or at least find ways of limiting it. And as I repeatedly reminded my former chancellor, who was struggling with the political environment, I have hope. After 25 years of my discipline and greater culture thinking what I do was somewhat irrelevant, it is seen now as so dangerous that states are legislating against it. This means we are seeing real, meaningful changes to the dominant culture. I have not seen this before. I've seen a lot of talk about it. That gives me hope. And now my final point, and probably my most controversial, albeit the one of which I am the absolute most convinced of everything I said. So if you disagree, buy me a drink later and argue with me later. I'm happy to discuss. And it's this. As teachers, we should not be provocateurs, but guides. Our students are as frustrated, despairing, and as concerned as we are, but without the life experience and skills to navigate this current reality. This is all they know. We need to be building trust with all of our students. Being in Tennessee, my students range the entire political continuum. And we have to introduce them to provocative ideas through challenging readings, external speakers, and other media. I'll go to your campus to be provocative, and you can come to mine. My job is to help them wrestle with the contentious ideas, not to pen them in a position with my skills. I can speak truth without coercing, and I do it best by modeling. Most of all, as I teach, what is forefront in my mind is my audience. They will not hear what I intend to say, and I think this is true for all conversations. They hear what they take away. It's not my intent that matters, it's my impact. So if my goal is for them to talk about hard things with each other, I have to model it. So every day, every conversation, every program, every piece, except for a few random campus committees I serve on, all the elements of my work advance my larger hope for society, even my administrative work. And in that hope, despite the despair and despite my continuous disappointment, I find my joy. And I deeply hope that these habits can help you reclaim and sustain your joy in our shared work ahead. So, bring it on. Thank you. So we have about 10 minutes for questions. So are there any? Yeah, please, Titus.
Thank you. That was inspiring. This is a question I put to the last president of the things. I think, political science has a particularly important role, and teaching and particularly the role of a guide, not a provocateur, I agree. And one of the challenges we have is about equipping citizens to do democracy. And when I suggested that perhaps the Political Science Association could do a more proactive role, it was said, oh, we don't want to lose our 501 whatever status. Mm-hmm. Now, there is an organization called the Atlas Network, which convenes 500 organizations that have been very successful in promoting the ideas of one Friedrich Hayek. And they're very effective. So they're a 51013 association, as is the America First Institute. Sure. So why can't political science be more proactive in equipping citizens as guides, not as provocateurs.
Yeah, and then it is working on skills, and where they use those skills, we don't always have control over, right? So, was there a question?
Why can't it? But in convening all of the different organizations that are engaged in democracy and say, look, how can we work together in a mission to strengthen democracy from the citizens upwards? That's the
I think it's a great idea. It's just not what I do. Yeah. I mean, I think it's worth us asking what is the role the discipline plays in supporting us as we go do this work ourselves in all our different places. Yes.
Yeah, thank you for your comments. I agree with you that we need to be guides and not provocateurs, okay? Totally agree with you. And I've always been a pluralist in the classroom, regardless of my own beliefs.
Yeah.
I was challenged in the fall in a way that I've never been challenged before. And I would like you to address that. And I was teaching a freshman seminar on U.S. democracy. Students read How Democracies Die by Zybek and Levitsky. People know this. And I had 3 students who essentially just said, well, you have your facts and we have ours. And I've never experienced that because I've always encouraged my students, the conservatives, to be better conservatives. And they've really appreciated that. I'm in a liberal arts college that's very liberal. And so I want to ask, so my question is, how do we address this new political climate that we're in where people have their own set of facts?
So I had a student when I was doing the Talking Across the Political Divide. They had an assignment they had to do. And one of the questions was, they had to talk about something they felt very strongly about. What evidence, what data, what information would cause you to reconsider your position? And the student wrote back, it was kind of the scariest thing I'd ever read from a student, was, there is no evidence, there are no facts, there is no information that could ever change my position on it. And I wrote her back and I said, well, then this isn't, we're talking about 2 different things. This is no longer a policy preference or a belief or an argument. This is an article of faith. And so now we're talking about 2 different things. I have found that incredibly effective, especially, I was department head for a long time, so I get the neighborhood people who come on in and want to have political conversations with me. Every discipline gets their whatever it is, and that's mine. And I've just found I would listen, and then I'd ask that question. And then when it became very clear, this wasn't, I would say, okay, so it's really not a discussion. You want to share with me about your faith. And that was very clarifying and very helpful. And it was helpful for the person saying it because they'd not thought about it that way. And that those are different conversations. So that's my 2 cents on it. Sure. I don't have a perfect answer. I know,
because I would say is they would not see it as their faith. It's their set of facts based on their information, even though we, talked about social media and polarization.
But I think the other thing is to realize in a classroom and for students, that student came back to me. She kept taking me, surprisingly. And came back to me before she graduated and said, I still don't agree with you, but I do think about it differently than I did before. And sometimes that's what I'm hoping for, that she's thinking about it. We still have the same kind of pushbacks on everything, but yeah, please.
Hi, can you say a little more about teaching at a public institution with this red state legislature? It's very demoralizing right now in our whole department. We've got a bill that is going to pass in Ohio that's going to have a significant chilling effect, as they say. So just a little bit I can take back to them.
Sure. I would say one thing is don't do the work of the legislature for them. What I've seen in Tennessee is they pass legislation, but I get the sense the faculty don't actually read that legislation. They read the coverage of it. And so they see all of the ways in which it initially appeared in committee, the worst possible outcome of it. Our lobbyists got involved. They actually made it much less. They actually even reinforced the right of academic freedom, which the Tennessee legislature had only acknowledged in legislation once before. We got an acknowledgement in 2023. Thank you very much. But instead, people thought about the faculty. We're talking about the debates and what people said it was going to do. But if you read the legislation, it didn't do any of those things. But they censored themselves. And so we're doing the legislature's work for them, and we should not do that. Yeah, John's institution's doing that like on steroids right now. Well, and you guys are especially doing it. You're clearing out your catalog before you're told to do it. Yeah, yeah. Yes, please.
Yes, hello, and I'm standing away from the microphone because as a teacher, I just have a booming voice, and that's not necessary.
Yep.
But what I wanted to say, even now we are looking so much on the political aspects, but one aspect as far as teaching I wanted to ask a question about is the costs for students in particular. One thing we share in common with all our students is we all went through that. We all went through the struggle of not just paying for tuition, but textbooks and the costs. And so what really can we do to advance learning while having as low costs for reading and things for students, especially when a lot of programs that will be providing loans and funding for students may be getting slashed. Mm-hmm. This is, I think, a very, and I know there's, you know, certain types of textbooks, no cost, like through OpenStax, links to JSTOR and others, but I just wanted to ask, and also, let's be honest, with AI, students aren't reading as much, they're looking for the short summary right there, well, or maybe not, I've just seen it sometimes with the quick one, so just wanted to see if there could be any input for that.
I think the choice of resources we use in our classrooms are some of the most important decisions that we make, and cost has to be part of the decision. It can't be the sole driver, because we also want to assign things they want to use. I'm fortunate. I'm at an institution where the library has heavily invested in this. So one of the texts I use in class, they were able to purchase a university license for. So for both of my classes that I teach, it's a political philosophy text for fall and spring. It's now free online for all of them, and we still can buy, you know, hard copy, you know, physical copies for those who want it. And so I'm fortunate. I'm at a place that pays attention to it. But I do think we have to think about what is the purpose of it. And I will say my students are reading better this semester than they have in years. So I don't want us to give up that ground. Again, law and philosophy. When we give up that ground and they don't read, I'm done. I don't want to teach in that environment, right? That's not for me. So I think we have to stay and fight, and I find they have a hunger for it. They have a hunger for meaning, and they just need to be shown how. And I think over the next, I won't see it all, but 20 years, I think what we're going to see is the consequences of COVID, right? We saw first it was their executive functioning skills. We saw that across the country. Now it's been, I think most of us agree, it's been writing. So we've had to go back and work on some writing skills we didn't be before. I think we're going to find for the next group, it's probably going to be reading because of where they were when they lost 2 years of an education. So that's the best I have for you. Sorry.
No, thank you. Thank you.
Hey, Michelle.
Hello.
I wanted to ask a very practical question. You talked about modeling being a guide and not a provocateur. And if you could share a little bit more about how you do that every day in the classroom.
I think reading things that make me uncomfortable and them seeing what that looks like. I remember when I was at Jackson State, I taught a course called Civil Rights and Affirmative Action Law. And we read together Tommy Shelby's We Who Are Black. They thought that was hilarious. But the fact that I was willing to read something with them that was not written for me and wrestle through it with them was an important dynamic in that class that carried on to other classes. So I think it is willing to say, I don't know this. And I'll tell them, this is something I'm really struggling with. I haven't figured this out yet. I just did that in civil liberties. We were looking at, well, you don't do that, sorry. But anyway, it was something that I don't know what I think. And we kind of went through the different sides, and they say, what do you know? And I said, usually I tell them exactly what I think. This one, I don't know. I find this one hard. And I think that builds community. Anyone else? Yeah.
So you talked about it, I think we all agree cynicism is infectious. What do you suggest and what do you do on your own campus to make
Well, I mean, I think some of it is some of these programs I've done have been in part equipping people to have the skills to feel like they can have hard conversations with each other, and then being willing to participate in those conversations. Bringing in speakers who represent diverse points of view. I know in the fall 3 years ago, maybe it was 4 years ago, yeah, it must have been 4 years ago, we were using So You Want to Talk About Race as the freshman course, and for the freshman course, which I thought was a bad choice, but that was me. And some of our conservative faculty and staff were very bothered by that and concerned, and so they put together a letter that suggested other readings and brought some people to, and they agreed on 2 things in this letter. One, that racism is systemic in the United States, so I could sign off on it, and that students need to be exposed. You know, my concern was we bring these conservative kids in from the hills and the mountains and the rural areas, and then we tell them everything they've been taught is wrong. We don't give them a place to get a foothold. And so they wanted to bring in conservative speakers, and I signed the letter. And in the letter, they said, many of us don't agree with any of these speakers. That would have been me. But again, you know, you have to have this discourse, and you have to have space for people to figure out if this is a topic we're interested in, then everybody's got to find a place to be able to participate in it, again, within the bounds of reality. And so, yeah, doing kinds of things like that. And I had people who were very confused. How could Michelle, after doing all of those groups, how in the world could she sign this letter? And I said, well, then ask me. I will tell you why, right? I want my conservative students not to wipe this out and say this isn't about anything I'm interested in. I want them to engage in this discussion too. That's how I try to do it. One last story. I was hoping someone would ask a question so I could work this in, but you didn't. So Hollis Watkins, who was a member of SNCC, he was a student, a former child of a sharecropper, worked in Mississippi, was part of the Macomb Project, spent his whole, SNCC freedom singer, spent his whole life fighting this, and was speaking to a group of college students, and the student says, I feel like I'm fighting a dragon with a nail clipper. What do I do? And Hollis said, you grab him by the little toe and you clip away. And you're aware that everybody else is all over this dragon fighting with their own nail clipper or stick or whatever equipment they have. And that's how you do it. And I'm just saying, we're all fighting dragons. We're only going to do a little piece of it ourselves, except for Titus. He's going to save the world for us. And you know, we're all doing it together. And that's where the hope and joy comes from. You're not doing it alone. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for that inspirational and thoughtful message. So before we adjourn for the rest of the sessions today, I just want to say a quick thank you to the APSA staff who has spent such amazing amount of time putting together the program and making sure everything is going great. So you would give your... I don't usually read out names, but I think it's important now. So Michelle Deardorff, Dr. Michelle, I'm sorry, Michelle Allendorfer. There's 2 Michelles. I have my notes. Michelle Allendorfer is our Senior Director for Teaching and Learning and Professional Development. Thank you, Michelle. And of course, Bennett Grubbs, and then Kristen Kausler, and Susie Cowgill, Dan Gibson, Lynn Ann Lowry, have just been amazing in terms of helping the meeting logistics as well. And on site here, we have 2 additional staff members, Ann Burke and Ben Fiore-Walker, who's our new Senior Director for Diversity Inclusion. So just, again, give them all a hand. So thank you so much.